Officer James Davidson stands at his post on Constitution Avenue, his leather boots planted firmly on the rain-soaked pavement, while steam rises from his fourth cup of black coffee, the morning fog hanging thick around the nation's capital like a heavy curtain, obscuring the monuments in the distance, his 15 years on the force etched into the hard lines around his eyes, and the permanent scowl that has become his trademark. The presidential motorcade had just passed through his checkpoint 10 minutes ago, leaving behind a lingering scent of exhaust and self-importance. Davidson remembers how the Secret Service agents barely acknowledged his presence, their dark sunglasses and earpieces, marking them as members of an elite circle he had always resented being excluded from, despite his numerous applications to federal law enforcement positions that were repeatedly rejected. He takes another sip of his cooling coffee, watching as streams of government workers hurry past, their badges swinging from lanyards around their necks like pendulums, marking time until retirement, his mind drifting to the argument he had with his ex-wife last night about missed child support payments and her threats to take him back to court when something catches his practiced eye. A sleek black SUV emerges from the fog, cutting through the morning traffic with an air of authority that makes the hairs on the back of his neck stand up, government plates gleaming under the weak morning sun. But something about the driver's body language seems off to Davidson, who prides himself on reading people the way others read morning newspapers. The driver keeps adjusting his rearview mirror in quick, nervous glances, his collar too perfectly starched, his tie too carefully knotted. Davidson straightens his spine and adjusts his utility belt, feeling the reassuring weight of his Glock 22 against his hip as the vehicle approaches his checkpoint. Slower than usual for a government vehicle at this hour, his training kicks in, remembering the briefing from last week about increased security threats against federal officials, but something deeper stirs in his gut, a chance to prove himself, to show that he isn't just another city cop directing traffic and writing parking tickets. He notices how the other cars on Constitution Avenue seem to naturally part ways for the black SUV, like smaller fish making way for a shark, his fellow officer Rodriguez giving him a questioning look from across the checkpoint. But Davidson merely nods, keeping his suspicions to himself, as he has learned to do over years of being passed over for promotions and watching younger, less experienced officers rise through the ranks ahead of him. The morning light catches the vehicle's tinted windows at just the right angle, giving Davidson a glimpse of movement in the back seat, a flash of red that triggers something in his memory about a news segment he half-watched last night. While nursing a beer alone in his apartment, the back-seat passenger sits with an air of authority that makes his jaw clench unconsciously, his hand moving to rest on his weapon as the SUV rolls to a stop at his raised palm. In this moment, before everything changes, before the window rolls down, before the world explodes into chaos and smartphone cameras and viral videos, Davidson feels a surge of power course through his veins like electricity, the kind of power that comes from knowing he holds complete control over this situation, over whoever sits behind those tinted windows with their government plates and air of superiority, his coffee forgotten on the nearby concrete barrier, growing cold in the morning air as destiny, disguised as chance, presents him with an opportunity he never knew he was waiting for. The tinted window glides down with an electric hum, revealing Attorney General Sarah Chen in the back seat, her presence hitting Davidson like a physical force as he recognizes the woman whose face has graced countless news broadcasts and whose policies he has cursed over beers with fellow officers, her signature red blazer, a deliberate choice that speaks of power and authority, while her dark eyes meet his with a calm that only serves to fuel his growing resentment. Chen doesn't immediately speak, allowing her driver to present their credentials, a thick folder of documents that Davidson deliberately takes his time examining while morning traffic rolls past his peripheral vision, catching the subtle shift of other officers at nearby posts, their attention drawn to the unusual sight of a government vehicle being held up at their checkpoint. Longer than protocol suggests, the weight of his Glock against his hip feels heavier with each passing second. Memories flashed through Davidson's mind of rejected federal applications, of watching less qualified candidates advanced past him of listening to Chen on television speaking about police reform and accountability, her Harvard-educated voice echoing in his head as she discussed systemic changes that threatened everything he had built his career upon. His fingers trace the edges of their credentials with deliberate slowness, while sweat begins to bead beneath his collar despite the morning chill. Ming were conducting enhanced security checks today. Davidson lies smoothly watching. A flicker of annoyance cross Chen's perfectly composed features. Her schedule to address Congress about police oversight legislation, clearly printed on the dashboard calendar, visible through the windshield. "I'm going to need everyone to step out of the vehicle." His voice carries the false authority of a man who has rehearsed this moment in his dreams. The driver starts to protest, mentioning diplomatic protocols and congressional schedules, but Chen raises a manicured hand, silencing him, her years of courtroom experience evident in how she controls the situation or attempts to. "Officer Davidson," she speaks his name with careful precision, having read it from his nameplate. "I understand your dedication to security. However, we have level 1 clearance and are expected on Capitol Hill in 20 minutes. Her reasonable tone only serves to feed the fire burning in Davidson's chest as he unclips his holster with practiced ease, the leather creaking softly in the morning air. "I don't make exceptions for anyone, ma'am." He emphasizes the last word with barely concealed contempt. "Security protocols are clear even for members of the current administration." The word current carries all the weight of his political disagreements, all his frustrations with a system he believes has forgotten the men and women who patrol its streets. Chen maintains her composure, but Davidson notices the slight tightening around her eyes, the way her fingers grip her briefcase a fraction harder, the subtle tells of someone unused to having their authority questioned, particularly by a city police officer at a routine checkpoint. He savors these micro expressions like sweet morsels of victory, while other vehicles slow down their occupants, beginning to notice the unusual confrontation unfolding on Constitution Avenue. The morning fog starts to lift as if nature herself wants to ensure there are no shadows to hide what happens next. Chen exchanges a quick glance with her driver, who seems increasingly uncertain, his training clearly never having covered this specific scenario, while Davidson feels the eyes of his fellow officers, watching some with confusion, others with growing concern as he steps back from the vehicle, his hand now resting openly on his weapon. Time seems to crystallize in this moment, the sounds of the city fading into background noise as Davidson sees his chance to make a statement to show that the old god still holds real power on these streets, regardless of who sits in the high offices or makes speeches about reform. The Attorney General's composed expression finally cracks as she realizes this is no longer a simple misunderstanding, but something far more personal, far more dangerous, a demonstration of power from a man who has waited years to hold authority over someone like her. Time freezes on Constitution Avenue as Davidson's Glock leaves its holster, the sound of leather straps snapping free cutting through the morning air like a thunderclap. Chen watches the barrel rise with an expression caught between disbelief and grim recognition, as if this moment represents everything she has been fighting against in her career. While nearby traffic grinds to a complete halt, drivers and passengers transfixed by the scene unfolding before them. Officer Rodriguez takes 2 steps forward from his post, his own hand hovering uncertainly near his weapon, torn between protocol and the wrongness of what he witnesses, his partner of 3 years transforming into someone unrecognizable as the morning sun glints off the barrel of Davidson's gun, creating tiny starbursts that reflect in Chen's dark eyes. "Step out of the vehicle now," Davidson barks, each word carried on waves of suppressed rage that have been building for 15 years. Chen moves with deliberate slowness, her Harvard Law ring catching the light as she raises her hands, the red blazer she chose this morning for its authority before Congress now making her stand out like a target, her driver frozen in place as if movement might trigger something irreversible. While smartphones emerge from car windows like periscopes, the cameras capturing every second of the U.S. Attorney General being held at gunpoint by a city cop drunk on power. The sound of car doors opening and closing ripples through the morning as curious onlookers emerge to witness history unfolding, some already live streaming the incident, their nervous whispers creating a symphony of horror and fascination. While Chen takes measured steps away from the vehicle, her heels clicking against the pavement in a rhythm that sounds like a countdown. Sirens wait in the distance, but whether approaching or receding remains unclear in the chaos. Get on your knees, Davidson commands, his voice carrying traces of every rejection, every passed over promotion, every perceived slight that led to this moment, his gun unwavering as Chen slowly, deliberately, gracefully lowers herself to the cold pavement, her eyes never leaving his face, while his fellow officers stand paralyzed by indecision, their training offering no clear protocol for an officer gone rogue against the nation's top prosecutor. Jen speaks, a voice carrying the weight of decades in courtrooms. I want you to think very carefully about your next action, Officer Davidson, every word measured, precise, designed to penetrate the fog of anger surrounding him. But her careful tone only serves to fuel his rage, the same educated, measured voice that has discussed police reform on countless news broadcasts, now trying to reason with him like he is another legal argument to be won. More phones appear, their cameras capturing every angle of the scene, as if the universe itself demands this moment be documented from all perspectives. Davidson shifts his stance, widening his legs, planting his feet more firmly, as if preparing for resistance, though Chen shows none, her knees now touching the damp pavement, her blazer collecting morning dew, while nearby a young girl in a passing school bus presses her face against the window, her mouth forming a perfect O of shock. Traffic backs up in both directions, creating a stadium of unwitting witnesses as Davidson circles Chen like a predator, savoring his moment of dominance, his shadow falling across her kneeling form, while the morning sun continues its inexorable climb, casting the scene in stark relief against the backdrop of the nation's capital, the Washington Monument rising in the distance like a silent judge overseeing this breakdown of justice and order. Sirens growing louder, now unmistakably approaching as Rodriguez finally finds his voice. Officer Davidson stand down, his words barely audible over the symphony of car horns, camera shutters, and the rising murmur of the growing crowd. The first video hits Twitter at 9:47 a.m., filmed from a shaking iPhone inside a Tesla Model 3, showing Davidson standing over Chen, his gun trained on her kneeling form, while the morning fog creates an almost cinematic backdrop against the Washington skyline. Within minutes, the footage spreads like wildfire across social media platforms, each share, each retweet, each angry comment adding fuel to a rapidly growing inferno of public outrage. News helicopters appear overhead, their rotors chopping through the morning air as more angles of the incident flood the internet. A high school student captures Davidson's smirk in crystal clear 4K resolution, while a business executive live streams Chen's dignified composure from his Audi dashboard cam, the nation's top prosecutor forced to kneel on wet pavement, her red blazer becoming a symbol of resistance against abuse of power, trending across platforms faster than social media algorithms can track. Inside the major networks' newsrooms, producers scramble to authenticate the footage, while their phones explode with tips and witnesses. CNN breaks into regular programming, first followed by Fox News and MSNBC, the children's screaming breaking news: U.S. Attorney General held at gunpoint by D.C. police officer, as political commentators struggle to frame their responses, their usual talking points rendered useless by the raw footage that continues to pour in from every angle. The video from Rodriguez's body cam leaks, showing his perspective as he finally approaches Davidson, his partner's face contorted with an almost ecstatic pleasure, while Chen maintains her composure, her words clear and steady as she continues to reason with the man holding her at gunpoint. Each new clip adds another layer to the story, some catching the whispered comments from Davidson about putting her in her place, others showing the growing horror on surrounding officers' faces as they realize the gravity of what's unfolding. Social justice activists mobilize within hours, their online networks lighting up with organized responses as hashtags multiply faster than fact checkers can verify them. Police abuse, Cheng kneels, badge bully, red blazer, justice for Chen, each trending topic carrying its own viral momentum, by political figures across the spectrum rushed to release statements, their carefully worded responses revealing the deep divides in how America views law enforcement and power. Jen becomes a Rorschach test for the nation. Those who have experienced abuse of power see their own trauma reflected in her dignity under pressure, while others scramble to justify Davidson's actions, claiming security protocols and uncertain times require aggressive policing. But the footage speaks louder than any pundit, showing the raw truth of authority corrupted by personal grievance played out on America's most prominent street. Inside the White House, staffers huddle around screens watching multiple angles simultaneously, their phones buzzing with urgent messages from Justice Department officials, congressional leaders, and foreign diplomats as the incident transforms from a local law enforcement issue into an international embarrassment. The president's social media team drafts and redrafts statements, trying to find the right words to address a nation watching its justice system turn against itself. Media outlets begin digging into Davidson's background, uncovering his rejected federal applications, his social media history, his divorce records, building a profile of a man consumed by resentment. While Chen's office releases a brief statement calling for calm and due process, her measured response only amplifying the contrast between her professional restraint and Davidson's emotional explosion, captured forever in high definition from dozens of angles. As the morning turns to afternoon, the footage continues to spread, reaching international news outlets. Security cameras from nearby buildings reveal new angles. Surveillance footage shows the lead up to the confrontation. Dashcams capture the aftermath, creating a complete digital timeline of an abuse of power so blatant, so clearly documented, that it forces everyone who watches to confront uncomfortable truths about authority, power, and justice in modern America. Internal affairs investigators sweep through the precinct like shadows, their presence sending ripples of unease through the ranks as they command a conference room B, transforming it into a war room with walls covered in timeline charts, surveillance photos, and sticky notes, tracking every minute of Davidson's 15-year career. Special Agent Marcus Torres leads the investigation, his reputation for cracking the blue wall of silence preceding him as he methodically builds a case that will shake the department to its core. Officer Rodriguez sits in the interview room, his hands wrapped around a paper cup of cold coffee, as he describes years of watching Davidson spiral, his testimony opening floodgates as other officers begin coming forward, each revelation more damaging than the last. Torres and his team uncover bodycam footage that had mysteriously disappeared from the system, screenshots of group chats showing Davidson bragging about targeting female drivers, especially those in positions of authority, the evidence mounting like a tsunami preparing to break. Across town in a secure federal building, Chen meets with prosecutors, her red blazer now replaced with a steel gray suit. As she reviews the growing mountain of evidence, her legal mind cataloging each incident, each witness statement, each video clip that reveals a pattern of behavior so clear it seems impossible that it went unchecked for so long, her own incident becoming just one thread in a tapestry of abuse that stretches back through years of carefully buried complaints. The investigation uncovers a network of deleted emails and modified reports showing how Davidson had systematically targeted women of color in positions of authority, conducting excessive searches, making unnecessary stops, writing questionable citations, all buried under mountains of paperwork and dismissed by supervisors who chose to look the other way. A rookie officer breaks down crying as she describes how Davidson had taught other officers to modify their report language to justify aggressive actions using codes and phrases that would pass administrative review. Surveillance footage from street cameras reveals Davidson following Chen's vehicle for several blocks before the incident, waiting for his moment, choosing his stage with the deliberation of a predator stalking prey, his movements showing premeditation that transforms the narrative from a spontaneous abuse of power into something far more calculated, far more sinister. Torres watches the footage, his jaw tightening as he realizes the full scope of what they're uncovering. In the evidence room, Torres' team discovers a hidden folder in Davidson's desk containing photographs of female judges, lawyers, and officials he had encountered on duty. Their personal information highlighted, their routines, documented in disturbing detail his obsession with authority figures, particularly women in power, laid bare in handwritten notes that read like the workings of a man consumed by his own perceived inadequacies. The investigation spreads to other precincts as more officers come forward describing similar incidents that were buried, ignored, or dismissed. Officers who had tried to report Davidson finding themselves reassigned to less desirable beats, their careers stalling while he continued unchecked, the thin blue line finally cracking under the weight of too many secrets, too many covered up incidents, too many years of looking the other way. Davidson's ex-partner breaks his silence in a 4-hour interview describing how he had requested a transfer after witnessing multiple incidents of excessive force, his guilt at staying silent eating at him until Chen's incident finally gave him the courage to speak. His testimony, corroborated by dashcam footage that had supposedly been lost to technical failures, but was recovered by its specialists working overtime to rebuild deleted files. As the sun sets on day 5 of the investigation, Torres stands before the evidence wall studying the interconnected web of incidents, witnesses, and evidence that has transformed a single act of abuse into an indictment of an entire system that allowed it to flourish. Outside his window, the media camps remain stationed, their cameras trained on the building, waiting for any hint of new developments, while inside the walls of silence crumble, bringing down not just one corrupt officer, but threatening to expose years of systemic failures and covered up misconduct. The federal courthouse stands like a fortress on a crisp autumn morning, its marble columns casting long shadows across the gathering crowd as Sarah Chen ascends the steps, her red blazer, now a symbol of resistance, photographed countless times since that fateful morning. She moves with measured grace past the media scrum, their cameras clicking like mechanical insects, while behind her Davidson enters through a side entrance, his police union lawyers flanking him like nervous bodyguards, their usual confidence shaken by the mountain of evidence awaiting them in courtroom 2B. Inside the courthouse, the air feels charged with anticipation as prosecutors wheel in cart after cart of evidence boxes, each one labeled meticulously with dates, incidents, witness statements, the product of thousands of hours of investigation that has uncovered a pattern of behavior so extensive it threatens to expose not just one officer's crimes, but an entire system's willing blindness. Davidson sits at the defense table, his once proud posture now hunched, his uniform replaced by a poorly fitted navy suit that makes him look smaller, somehow diminished, as he watches Chen conferring with the prosecution team, her presence commanding attention, even in whispered conversations. Judge Maria Rodriguez enters the courtroom, her reputation for handling high-profile cases preceding her as she surveys the packed gallery where activists, journalists, and law enforcement officers sit in uneasy proximity, their collective breath held as she calls the court to order, her gavel crack echoing through the tensed silence. While the prosecution rises to present their opening statement, Assistant U.S. Attorney James Wong approaches the jury, his words painting a picture not of a single incident, but of years of escalating abuse, protected by a system that valued silence over justice. The evidence presentation begins with the viral videos of Chen's humiliation shown on massive screens that make Davidson flinch as he watches himself from multiple angles, his face contorting with visible pleasure as he forced the Attorney General to kneel. But the prosecution is just warming up as they begin methodically introducing years of body cam footage, dashcam videos, surveillance tapes, witness statements, each piece fitting together like a massive puzzle, revealing the portrait of a man who systematically abused his authority, targeting women of color in positions of power. Davidson's lead attorney, Mark Stevens, attempts to paint his client as a dedicated officer working in difficult times, his arguments falling flat as prosecutors counter each point with documented evidence of premeditation, bias, and calculated abuse, the defense strategy crumbling visibly as Stevens fumbles through cross-examination, his usual courtroom swagger deserting him as witness after witness describes incidents that can no longer be explained away by protocol or procedure. In the gallery, Chen watches the proceedings, her face a mask of professional composure, though those seated nearby notice her fingers tightening on her leather portfolio, when particularly damning evidence is presented, her own incident, now serving as the catalyst that brought years of hidden abuse into the light. While across the aisle, Davidson's ex-wife sits with their teenage daughter, both women refusing to meet his desperate glances, their presence a silent testament to patterns of behavior that extended beyond his professional life. Court officers maintain rigid attention as more officers take the stand, breaking ranks to testify against one of their own. Their statements carrying extra weight as they describe how complaints were buried, reports, modified evidence, lost in a systematic effort to protect Davidson that now threatens to expose dozens of other cases of covered up misconduct. The blue wall of silence cracking under the weight of truth as prosecutors methodically dismantle years of protective practices and willful ignorance. Judge Rodriguez maintains strict control of her courtroom as tensions rise between pro-police and police reform factions in the gallery, her years of experience evident in how she handles objections, sidebars, and the growing media circus outside, while inside Davidson watches his carefully constructed world collapse evidence by evidence, witness by witness, his eyes darting between exits as if contemplating escape, even as his anchor monitor ensures his presence until justice can finally be served. Officer Sarah Martinez takes the stand on day 7 of the trial, her crisp uniform a stark contrast to her trembling hands as she faces Davidson directly for the first time since the academy 12 years ago. The courtroom holds its breath as she begins to speak, her voice initially soft but gaining strength with each revealed truth about the partner she had been assigned to shadow during her rookie year, the memories she had tried to bury surfacing now with crystal clarity as prosecutors guide her through years of witnessed abuse. The gallery watches transfixed as Martinez describes her first week with Davidson, how he taught her to profile vehicles with professional women, especially minorities, explaining his techniques for finding reasons to pull them over, his methods for ensuring dash cameras accidentally malfunctioned during these stops, her testimony painting a picture of calculated predation masked as law enforcement, while Chen leans forward in her seat, her legal pad forgotten as she recognizes patterns that explain why so many professional women had complained about police harassment in recent years. Martinez's voice breaks as she recounts the night she tried to report Davidson to their sergeant, showing footage she had secretly recorded on her phone of him terrorizing a female judge at a traffic stop, only to find the footage deleted from her device. The next day, her locker vandalized with a warning note, her subsequent transfer to desk duty presented as a promotion while Davidson continued his patrols, unchecked, her words now flowing like a river breaking through a dam as years of suppressed guilt and fear transform into determination to expose the truth. Evidence appears on the courtroom screens, text messages between officers discussing how to handle complaints against Davidson, emails showing supervisors deliberately misplacing bodycam footage, documentation of witness intimidation, all meticulously collected by Martinez over years of silent observation stored in multiple locations, waiting for a moment when the truth might finally stand a chance against the system designed to suppress it. Chen nods almost imperceptibly as Martinez's methodology reveals the mind of someone who understood that justice required evidence that could survive attempts to bury it. Davidson shifts in his chair, his attorneys whispering urgently as Martinez's testimony demolishes their defense strategy piece by piece, her detailed accounts, supported by recovered footage, dates, times, locations, forming a pattern too clear to deny. While in the jury box, several members take rapid notes, their expressions shifting from professional neutrality to barely contained anger as the scope of the corruption becomes clear, not just one officer's actions but an entire network's commitment to protecting him. The prosecution introduces security footage from the police station showing Davidson bragging about his encounters with female drivers, his colleagues' uncomfortable laughter, now damning evidence of complicity, while Martinez identifies each officer present explaining their roles in maintaining the wall of silence that had protected Davidson for so long, her perfect recall transforming years of casual conversations into documented conspiracy. Judge Rodriguez watches intently, her years of experience allowing her to recognize watershed moments in legal proceedings as this testimony systematically dismantles years of institutional protection. Chen catches Martinez's eye as the officer describes the morning of the incident, with the Attorney General revealing that she had immediately recognized the same patterns she had documented for years, immediately began downloading footage from every camera in the vicinity, knowing that this time with this victim, the truth would have to be acknowledged. Her foresight, ensuring that no evidence could conveniently disappear this time, while in the gallery activists, lawyers, and fellow officers lean forward, absorbing every word of testimony that validates years of complaints and suspicions. As Martinez concludes her testimony, the courtroom remains silent, processing the weight of revelations that transcend this single case, implications that reach into every precinct, every department where similar patterns might lurk. Davidson stares at his former colleague, his face a mask of betrayal and dawning comprehension that the very system he had manipulated for so long had finally turned against him. While Chen closes her eyes briefly, a silent acknowledgement of every woman who had faced similar abuse without the power or platform to fight back, their collective experiences finally finding voice in a testimony that would ensure justice could no longer be denied. The prosecution rises on day 9 of the trial, a flash drive held aloft like a key to Pandora's box as Davidson shifts uneasily in his chair, his attorneys exchanging worried glances, having received this new evidence only hours before Special Agent Torres stands ready at the technology station, preparing to protect the contents that will shatter any remaining illusion of Davidson's innocence. The courtroom holds its collective breath as the first messages appear on the massive screens. Text conversations spanning 5 years illuminate the courthouse, their damning content displayed in crisp high definition, showing Davidson and a network of officers discussing their targeting of professional women, messages filled with racial slurs, misogynistic jokes, and detailed plans to abuse their authority, the timestamps matching perfectly with incidents reported by Martinez, while in the jury box, several members cover their mouths in horror as the true depth of the conspiracy unfolds before them. Davidson's lead attorney fumbles through objections, his usual confidence crumbling as prosecutors systematically demonstrate the authenticity of each message. Digital forensics experts testifying to the impossibility of fabrication, while Davidson himself seems to physically shrink in his chair as years of private conversations become public record, his carefully crafted image of a dedicated officer dissolving under the weight of his own words, his true character revealed in messages that read like a manual for systematic harassment. Chen watches from her seat as prosecutors reveal a folder dedicated specifically to her, discovered in Davidson's personal cloud storage, photographs of her speaking at law enforcement reform conferences, screenshots of her television appearances, notes about her daily routine, all collected months before their confrontation on Constitution Avenue, proving beyond doubt that the incident was no random abuse of power but a carefully planned attempt to humiliate a woman he had long targeted. The evidence continues to mount as Torres presents recovered dashcam footage showing Davidson instructing rookie officers in his techniques, explaining how to modify reports to justify excessive force, teaching them to identify and target successful minority women, his voice casual as if discussing standard procedure, while in the gallery several female officers stand and walk out, unable to watch their profession being twisted into a weapon against the very citizens they had sworn to protect. Davidson's ex-wife clutches their daughter's hand as text messages between Davidson and his friends reveal conversations about their divorce, his rage at being financially dependent on her success, his plans to use his badge to intimidate her new partner, the personal vendetta paralleling his professional abuse of power, while Judge Rodriguez maintains her composure though her knuckles whiten against her gavel as particularly vicious messages are read into evidence. Digital forensics experts demonstrate how Davidson had created a sophisticated system for tracking his targets using police databases for personal surveillance, his methodology revealing not just bias but calculated predation, the evidence growing so overwhelming that his remaining supporters in the gallery begin to quietly exit the courtroom, leaving empty seats that speak volumes about the abandonment of a man whose true nature can no longer be denied or defended. The final blow comes as prosecutors reveal a hidden folder in Davidson's phone containing recordings of himself bragging about the Chen incident recorded at a bar hours after it happened, his slurred voice celebrating his power trip, describing the satisfaction of seeing a powerful woman forced to kneel, his friends' nervous laughter in the background, suggesting that even they recognized he had gone too far. Bai Chen maintains her professional composure, though those seated nearby notice her hands clasped tightly together, the only sign of the emotion this revelation provokes. As the evidence presentation concludes, Davidson's defense team sits in stunned silence, their legal pads empty of notes, their strategy in shambles, as the client stares blankly ahead, the weight of his exposed life seemingly crushing him into his chair, while Judge Rodriguez calls for a recess, her voice cutting through the shocked silence of a courtroom that has witnessed the complete dismantling of not just one officer's defense but an entire system of protected abuse. Silence descends over the courthouse as the jury files in after 6 hours of deliberation, their faces bearing the weight of a decision that will resonate far beyond these walls. Davidson stands mechanically at the defense table, his once pristine uniform replaced by a rumpled suit that hangs on his frame like borrowed armor. Lai Chen sits in the front row of the gallery, her red blazer a beacon in the sea of muted colors, her presence a reminder of the morning that sparked a revolution in law enforcement accountability. The foreman rises, a retired school teacher whose hands tremble slightly as she holds the verdict form, her voice steady as she pronounces guilty on all counts: civil rights violations, abuse of power, assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy to violate constitutional rights, each charge landing like a hammer blow in the hushed courtroom. While Davidson seems to age years with each pronouncement, his shoulders slumping further as the full weight of consequence finally settles upon him. Judge Rodriguez leans forward for sentencing, her years on the bench having witnessed countless cases, but few that demanded such a clear message to those who would abuse the power entrusted to them. She speaks of trust betrayed, of power corrupted, of systems that enabled abuse through silence, her words painting a portrait of justice not just for Chen, but for every woman who had suffered similar abuse without recourse or resolution, whose voices had been silenced by badges and bureaucracy. Chen remains still as the sentence is read, 25 years, without possibility of parole, her expression neutral, though those seated nearby notice a single tear tracking down her cheek, not for herself but for every victim who came before her, whose complaints were buried, whose fears were dismissed, whose lives were forever altered by encounters with officers who saw their badges as licenses for persecution. But in the gallery, Officer Martinez sits surrounded by fellow officers who choose truth over tradition, their presence a silent declaration that the blue wall of silence has finally begun to crack. Davidson struggles as officers move to handcuff him, his former colleagues now leading him toward a future behind bars, his desperate glance toward the gallery meeting only turned backs and averted eyes as the brotherhood he counted on dissolves in the face of justice served, while outside the courthouse crowds erupt in celebration, their cheers audible through thick marble walls, their signs and banners transforming from demands for justice to declarations of victory. Prosecutors pack away their evidence, the photos, text messages, surveillance footage, testimony transcripts, now destined for law school curricula, teaching future generations of legal professionals about the case that transformed police accountability. While Chen approaches Martinez in the corridor, their quiet conversation, a moment of shared understanding between two women who fought the system from opposite sides and won. News helicopters circle overhead, broadcasting live as Davidson exits the courthouse, no longer an officer but a convicted criminal, his journey from power to powerlessness captured in high definition for the nation to witness, while across the country police departments begin internal reviews, knowing that the precedent set today will echo through every precinct, every department, every interaction between law enforcement and the communities they serve. Chen steps into the sunlight, facing a forest of microphones, her statement brief but powerful, speaking not of personal victory but of systematic change, of the responsibility that comes with authority, of the courage required to stand against abuse of power, her words carrying the weight of someone who understands that true justice requires not just punishment of the guilty, but transformation of the systems that enabled them. As darkness falls over the Capitol, the courthouse steps remain crowded with citizens holding candles, their quiet vigil a testament to lives touched by abuse of power and the hope that Davidson's conviction represents. While inside the empty courtroom, the evening cleaners work around discarded signs of justice, served coffee cups, legal pads, hastily scribbled notes, the detritus of a case that reminded America that no one stands above the law, not even those sworn to uphold it.